Welcome to Enter the Sandman. From Vertigo to Netflix, today you'll be meeting a series of phantasmagorical characters to talk you through the psychology of Neil Gaiman's amazing series. But first, let's meet our presenters. I'm Dr. Isaac Taitz. I'm the head psychologist of All Mind Health and All Sleep Health, conveniently enough, a clinical psychological services corporation for geeks, nerds of all ages.
And my name is Benjamin Taitz. I am a registered psychological associate and a clinical psychology doctoral candidate, hopefully graduating this year. And I work in forensic psychology, and I am the co-host of a podcast called Mental Health Quest, The Therapist's Office and Beyond, where we talk about mental health.
All right.
And yes, we are related.
And if each of you wants to state which character you're dressed as, that might help. I'm obviously Dream.
I'm Matthew.
I am a cobra. I'm the devil. Hi, I'm Justine Mastin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, and I am best known for being the co-author of this book, Starship Therapise, Using Therapeutic Fan Fiction to Rewrite Your Life, which is available in stores.
Even the forked tongue can get tied.
It's the forked tongue, it's hard.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Shelly Clevenger. I'm dressed as Desire this evening, and I am the chair of the Department of Victim Studies at Sam Houston State University, the only and the first Department of Victim Studies in the world.
The entire world.
Hi, I am soon-to-be Dr. Brittani Oliver Sillas-Navarro. I am at Alliant International University. I am a grief researcher, and I work with transitional age youth, so TAY clients, and I am deaf. I never thought that would be a cool thing to say.
Yes.
But I'm representing.
I'm Madison. With 2 N's and 1 Y, but not where you think.
And who are you dressed as?
I am Dr. Elizabeth Hahn. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and health service provider. I work as a generalist. I work with youngins, adolescents, adults, families and couples, and I provide care mostly through telehealth currently, through a trauma-informed, culturally sensitive, neurodivergent affirming, and gender-affirming lens.
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, a.k.a. Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University. I run a little thing on YouTube called Dark Loops Productions. I'd be happy to give you one of these later. And I also organize a thing at Illinois State called ReggieCon, where we have a monthly Zoom panel open to the world, where we celebrate the History Heritage Month being celebrated nationally with a discussion usually of a graphic novel. And I'm coming to y'all today as the new Corinthian. If y'all remember, I was taken out. I gotta say, y'all got the prettiest eyes I've ever seen. Thank you very much.
I'm Travis. I write stuff. Okay. I am Dr. Travis Langley, distinguished professor of psychology at Henderson State University in the middle of nowhere. Best known as author of the book Batman in Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, the best book on Batman ever written by me. Editor, lead writer, head nerd of the herd on a stack of other books. Most recently, Stranger Things Psychology, Life Upside Down, which a bunch of these fine folks wrote for. Coming up in May, Spider-Man Psychology, Untangling Webs. And then in the fall, this is the first edition. The second edition of what was Doctor Who Psychology, a Madman with a Box, but the second edition, because that Madman no longer applies. The second edition, Doctor Who Psychology, Times Change, with a much cooler cover. Yes. I am cosplaying as guy who likes Batman.
So basically Neil Gaiman. So for today, we're going to be asking and answering a few questions to this panel The first will be about dreams and how they shape us or how we may shape them. Then we'll discuss and talk a little bit about grief and loss. We'll talk a little bit about everyone's favorite kind of dream, the nightmare. And then we'll just take a light, leisurely stroll to hell and back. So everyone in the panel will have a chance to speak a little bit about each topic. The first of which being dreams. How do we define, or what are these weird nocturnal visions we trip out on for a couple of hours each night and then forget in the morning? How do they shape us? How do we shape ourselves? Whoever has a thought, an inkling, by all means.
A lot of the stuff going on in your brain during a dream is stuff that goes on during normal waking time, except your experiences are not constrained by the world outside of you. That's why all these, you can hear sounds and, those kind of things, because the world is not having the constraining impact on your experiences that it usually does.
If we want to go really dry and boring, a lot of the evidence on dreams are a side effect of specific mess of random brain activity at a certain point in the night, and part of your brain is trying to make it make some sense. But that's a boring answer. There's a lot of empirical evidence backing up that boring answer, but it's there. But what do we do? What is this mental editor and the us, and what are we doing with these dreams? We can have fun with the dreams. We can be scared of the dreams. We can explore things that are safer to explore in that setting than elsewhere in the world. It's kind of like, in an odd way, it's like cosplay. Cosplay, you get to explore things, be things, try things that you don't elsewhere in life. And in an odd way, you can't, and we're not just talking lucid dreams, which I think comes up later, so I won't get into that. But even within the dreams, sometimes there's a mental rehearsal. You're going, I've never had a conversation with an 80-foot snake. Well, but that's still practicing social skills within that dream. There are odd representations of the things that go on in real life that happen within these dreams. I got the subtitle of one of the books from a dream. The Wonder Woman book, Lassoing Psychology, was the subtitle. I'd pictured a book in the dream, and there was the subtitle. I had a truly terrible subtitle for a different book in a dream and did not use that one, but one was good.
Let's get really ephemeral, shall we? Well, because something that you said, Travis, really sparked a thought for me, which is that, dreaming is like cosplay. And when I think about coming to conventions, I think about us being closer, being able to dip a spoon into the collective unconscious. So for the Jungians out there, or the non-Jungians out there, the collective unconscious is this soup that swims all around us, that holds all of the archetypes from the beginning of time. And we can tap into it. And in this universe, Dream has the entire collective unconscious flowing through him. And when I think of dreams as stepping into the collective unconscious. And the same way when we step into a convention hall, we're kind of looking at everyone else who are playing out these archetypes that are also from the beginning of time. So in a way, we are currently swimming around in the collective unconscious. Are we awake or are we dreaming? Discuss.
I like that because the memory activations going on in sleep are going on in daily life as well. So I'd argue we're walking around in externally modulated dreams. In other words, your memories are always in everything you experience. When you talk to your friend about that last crap episode of Game of Thrones, walking down the stairs, and then you start to fall because you thought you'd hit the bottom, but you didn't. How the heck do you know where your feet were any of the time? You didn't, because you were running them on memories. So we're living in our memories all the time, and in waking life, they're modulated by these things we don't have direct control over.
I think dreams, for at least those ones that we do remember, because we are always dreaming, we just don't always remember them. I think especially the ones that we remember because they mean something to us, because it's giving us a glimpse into a world that we want to see in the waking world. And especially for me, I view dreams as a way that I am kind of convincing myself that, okay, yes, these things that I like or want can still be, because I struggle with a lot of like imposter syndrome and I feel like I'm not good enough. And in dreams, I can be good enough. And so I think it's a way that I'm telling myself, yeah, stop dissing yourself, you're good.
And so when I think about dreams, and this relates to my cosplay here as desire, I think about it as my heart's desire. So sometimes, thinking about the conventions, or I know we're going to talk about grief, but I had a dream the other night that I was with my grandma and my grandma died. And so, in that dream, though, she was alive, right? And I got to have those conversations. And when we think about being in our dreams, we get to live what we can't live in our waking world, which is why I think they're so powerful.
How did you know what I was about to say?
And how did you know that's the next
now
part?
it's powerful. I was going to say that for dreams for me, I am a young adult orphan, and I think about these meaning-making opportunities. And so you have connectedness with something that you miss, connectedness with something that you've lost, connectedness with something that's either silly or inferior or everything in between. And so how many people have like dream apps? Nobody? Just me?
Just the dream psychology.
I am notorious for waking up and be like, what does a turtle mean?
I thought you said dream abs.
Apps. Yeah. So
All the way down.
I love looking at those things of just trying to figure out, like, okay, the spider web was like leaking. Like, what does that mean? And so I think that we try to continue to configure these ideas of meaning and reality based off of the experiences that we have while we're asleep, because it either brings us comfort or brings us discomfort, and our reality is based or shifted upon that. Because if I get a reading or a meaning that I don't like, I get to say, this isn't real. This is whatever. But if it hits, it hits. And I get to internalize it as being something meaningful and powerful and something that was meant to be. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, and sometimes it's everything in the middle.
So I'm actually going to speak against these dream interpretation diaries and apps. I'm sure there are good ones out there, and if you find one that you like, by all means, go ahead and use them. However, more recently, the field of dream researchers and dream therapists and counselors are working towards what's called a humanistic approach. The International Association for the Study of Dreams, of which we also do cons and we also dress up, but more as our own dream characters, has come together and has spoken that a more humanistic approach would be that the dreamer is the expert of their own mind. Mm-hmm. You're the one that's known you all your life, for the most part. We therapists just got to meet you the last couple of hours. So if you are curious about bringing up a dream in therapy, don't be too worried that it's going to be some old stuffy Viennese man telling you that you must be thinking this thing, and if you resist it, then that means you really want to do something to your father and something to your mother.
Yeah, even Jung criticized Freud for saying this symbol represents certain things to everybody. Mm-hmm. And then Adler, I'm throwing out names. Other psychologists back then said Freud was full of crap. But
And then there's also the concept that Freud himself's whole aspect of the psychosexual came as a reaction to his culture at the time. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Vienna at the time, we have these hysterical people, mostly women, having a terrible time. And the original concept was actually called seduction theory. So desire, you, my dear notorious sister, might have something in common here. That really a lot of the concepts and a lot of the things that people were dealing with were traumas of a seductive and romantic, unfortunate nature. But Freud knew that by that time, if you tell a Viennese lord or heiress that their weird uncle is actually the cause of their daughter's hysteria, then you will never get to do the talk therapy with them. So he had to couch the whole aspect of talk therapy, which he knew would be the talking cure, would be helpful, in this somewhat more palatable manner of psychosexual theory. But the Viennese are an interesting bunch.
I think along with that, we would be remiss to not also talk about daydreaming.
Yes.
And tying in with that, also trauma responses and how potentially that could also be an aspect of disassociation, which can be a very beautiful and important aspect of someone's life, especially in defense of certain things and certain experiences that people are having and have had. I think it's also really important that we're talking about dreams as far as how it differs in our brains And when we look at brain activity, when we look at brain waves, we can see differences in how that is working and how, if for people who are more familiar with brain waves, there's more theta. And that also occurs when people are meditating. And so you can see that there are really important levels of consciousness and times when people are entering into these states, and how that can help with processing a variety of information. And we can also understand that there's a difference between sensation and perception. So we can perceive a variety of sensations, like all of the colors in this room and how amazing a lot of people are looking in their cosplay and in their fandom and their representation, and it's beautiful. And I can sense that, and I can sense people's energy here in this room. There's also perception, because when we dream, we are perceiving sensations, but we're not actually experiencing that sensation in our body. So we might not actually be, running physically, but we might be dreaming that we are. And so those sensations are also happening. And what's going on with that is an important question that science is still trying to understand in many ways. We do know that we are experiencing this, and that humans aren't the only ones that dream, which is also a really fantastic aspect that hasn't yet been explored too much in the in the series.
Well, until you watch that final episode of The Dream of a Thousand Cats.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And before we shift over into more animalistic concepts, there is also this aspect that whether we are having a dream of a wish fulfillment or a threat simulation, these are ways that we're processing data, information, and learning and growing from these things helps us become the next version of ourselves. So either from characters in the series, in the comics, or in the shows, or even just through your own work, is there any way you've seen individuals dreaming up their next self, constructing themselves, or even their ability to perceive their reality?
This actually came up just the last week. As I said, I work in forensic psychology. I work with people on parole who are trying to kind of rehabilitate. And I had a client that was saying like, hey, I heard that in psychology you talk about dreams. I was like, sure, sometimes. What happened? And they told me about this dream that they had where basically their offense didn't happen. Everything leading up to the offense still happened exactly as they remembered it, and they made the same choice, but the offense didn't happen. And so they were trying to understand what did that mean. And so when we were talking about it, the client was kind of thinking about what were those choice moments that they went through, what factors were they vulnerable to that kind of led them down the path of the offense. And it kind of came up with like, wait, so if I want to do something different, I need to know what I did before and what happened to me. And so it was kind of a really very powerful moment, and especially considering this is someone who didn't want to come in, they don't want to come into therapy. But for them to kind of see, okay, well, I can still recognize what happened to me, and it's not just this one event. So it was really kind of interesting. I was meaning to talk to you about it earlier, but forgot.
Let's talk about social constructionism. All right, if this is a new concept for you, here's the quick and dirty. Everything around us was socially constructed. From humans living and working and being together since the beginning of time, we have formed rules and roles and boundaries that constrain our lives. These are little t truths, not capital T truths. We believe they're capital T truths, but they're freaking not. So things like gender, race, all the sexuality, all that stuff that's supposed to be capital T truths, they're little t truths. Especially what we say about them and what we believe about them are little t truths. So we can dream, maybe not a literal dream, but more like a
little d
heart dream, a little d dream. a different world, a world where we are not constrained by these rules that should not constrain us anyway because they are a bunch of bull. Shit. I did it. It's after 7.
I'll give you guys a little bit of example just to bounce off of her of what it means to have a little T versus big T truth.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody think of a white shirt, right? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is it made of? What's the cut style? Every single person in this room might have a different shirt. How many are V-neck? How many are crew cut? How many are cotton? How many are wool? Right?
No wool.
Like nobody. No. But that's what she's saying. Like
Wool is not
how
the
we
truth.
decide our reality, how we base our reality is different, even though I ask for the same instruction. Just think of a white shirt. But we're creating these things, and we get to. Everyone's telling us the right thing is to think of a white shirt. However, the truth is that they're all different. We're all unique. We're all individual people. It's my favorite example.
I love that example.
Yeah, I love all that.
That example.
Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt anyone.
No, all I was going to say is my favorite example of this from the television series on Netflix was Galt. And, Galt was like, I was made to be a nightmare, but I'm not a nightmare. I've changed. I've seen that that's not how I feel, right? It's a trans experience. This is how, I came into the world, but it's not who I am. And so Galt reconceptualized their reality. And my invitation to all of you is you can do that every day. So go shake it up.
Shake it up. So I do want to follow up on that if I can, because the idea of social construction is definitely on target. The data are quite clear. The way we experience each other is by experiencing each other in terms of plans for doing the same thing you're seeing other people do. So they call them mirror neurons, and the idea that we actually resonate to each other's plans. So I don't see your body and then think about it. I actually experience you in terms of what would come next. And the coolest study I've read in the past 20 years, a baby chickadee was learning to sing its song from the father. And it was using its mirror neuron, so the father would sing, and it was basically activate the chickadee's planning centers, and it would sing. But after the baby learned the song, its own brain started to inhibit the father's influence on his chirping. Now, it's like, why would that happen? Well, it wasn't a conscious choice because it was well done at the neural level. But the point is, if you start flapping your wings, every single time you see someone else flapping their wings, you're just going to crash into each other all the time. So you've got to have something that resists, that makes you, you. And that tension between being in a group in an inescapable way, yet at the same time being someone, I think the only way we can transcend that tension is to be a hermit. And I think the tension of how do I be in a space of others is pretty much how do I do what they're not? Because it's very, your mom said, don't go out with them, they're bad influence. She knew what she was talking about.
That's a perfect transition to our next topic for speaking about those who have taught us, those who have given us information and have been with us for a long period of time, that they seep into our subconscious, our mental processing, and then what do we do when they leave? So in the Sandman series, we have some illustrations of loss and bereavement. And some of these are a little more fantastical, and some of these do reflect how do we grieve in waking and in dreaming. What are your thoughts?
I will talk forever. I do want to remind everyone when we think about grief and loss, it's not just death of somebody. It can be grief of identity, grief of power. We see Morpheus lose these things, and it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that dies. My very favorite episode is when they walk through and she's taking these lives and how beautiful and memorable it is. And I'm going to do story time right now and some self-disclosure. So my father passed away before my mother. And I remember the night that she passed away, I had a dream where my father was in the house. And he said, I've been waiting for her for so long. and it means and meant so much. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, it doesn't have to be this momentous occasion. It can be kind words. It can be an experience that I've had that I have personalized. And when we think about loss and when we think about this show, just to tie it back, it's an opportunity to see that it can be both and. Grief and loss is an experience that has a totality of life and love and hurt and pain and shame and guilt and everything in between. And you see these complex characters, especially Death, have a real human experience of how do you do this every day? And that was something that he truly was like, this is something that I wouldn't want for myself. But as his sister, as somebody who understands the reality of the world, this is something that everybody doesn't escape. It's the only universal thing that we all have. It's beautiful and it's sad and it's all these things, but she's able to do it in such a profoundly competent and caring and sensitive way in which she's comforting and compassionate and honest. And I think that her character really does emulate what it means to have the experience of grief and loss, because no one gets to tell you how to do it. And no one gets to tell you how to feel. The scene of her picking up that baby, oh God. Like you go through the emotions of bad luck, that guy going out on the street after trying to, chase a soccer ball. Sucky luck that there's a little baby that dies. An older man who dies just late in his life. What a good life he could live. And that's the honest truth of loss. And we see with this show that there's not just loss in just death, but there's also loss in identity. There's loss of sense of self. There's loss of self-control, where people get lost in power and ambition and other things like that. And I think that this is why the show makes me so happy because I can talk about death forever, but it shows the human experience, and it shows the complexity of how and what it means to lose something, because every single one of you have lost something that mattered, small, big, or anything in between. So
if I may follow that, beautiful. What I love about the way death was portrayed was the grace that the death character brought to passing. When we watch Wakanda Forever, we have a whole culture showing grace. We see an entire culture being with each other in synchronous dance ways, where they're engaging in collective grieving. So I find it just fascinating that in a tale written by a Westerner, right, that the grace comes through an individual. And then when we go to a tale like Wakanda Forever, the grace is built into the infrastructure of how they collectively mourn. And I thought I just saw the connection between your description of grace there.
I mean, dreams will hit on our fear of loss, of course, but there's also a comfort in a lot of them. And if anybody thinks I was like texting or something, no, I was looking up details on a dream that I jotted down once. The summer before lockdown, my dad's uncle had died, and my dad was going to be performing the service. He was my dad's Methodist minister, but this was a few months after my dad's stroke, so he was mostly paralyzed on one side, so he needed me to help him. And the night before the service, I dreamed, I'm talking to Uncle Bob, who had also been a Methodist minister, and I remember the setting where it was too. It had been the last place that I'd seen him, and he was telling me, it's like, oh, your dad's going to do fine, tell him that. And he said, you're going to do fine too, Professor. That's what my uncle liked to call me. And it's just a simple little thing, and I mentioned that. First I mentioned to my dad, and that was some reassurance to him on that. Okay, so I also told Bob's wife and daughter, and they were both like, that sounds like him. No, I'm not a believer there's something supernatural to that or whatever. It's your brain building something you need or want in that moment based on what you know, regardless of whether there's something supernatural to it or not. It had meaning in that situation. It was meaningful and this odd kind of reassurance, no matter what you thought about its origin.
Can I share a positive dream? Like,
Please.
Not just the
No,
headline,
That was not
only
meant-
dead people.
I'm
shake you to your core.
all right.
A very
I'll save
quick
it.
one. A very quick one.
The night before I taught my first class as a tenure track professor, my whole time in grad school, I'd had nothing but imposter syndrome dreams, that I was late, that I hadn't got stuff done, blah, 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 blah. And I'm having one of these dreams the night before, and I'm panicking, and I rush into the room, and someone looks at me and says, no, man, you're the professor. Just come on up and teach. I swear to God, that happened in a dream. So I was telling myself, chill out, brother. Just go teach. You got here. But, the memories of being an imposter just couldn't be put at bay. So.
And sometimes when we are in this process of grief, our nervous system might utilize our loved ones as a means to help us through the process. So where there may be these very difficult bereavement dreams, like the separation dream at the top here, where you see your loved one disappearing, going away, which can really illustrate the difficulty we had disconnecting and how harsh it is that we need to accept it. Or there are times where we will have a reunification dream and of seeing our loved ones as happy and healthy. We can give them another hug again. We can hear positive affirmations from them. We can use this process to grieve, to continue our bond with our loved ones, so that whether it's unintentional, a surprise dream that happens, or if you have a therapist that knows how to work with it, you can incubate such a dream. You can work towards remembering your dreams and asking that loved one to come back. And also, if you don't remember such a dream, that doesn't mean they didn't visit you. It just means you didn't remember it. So, beyond those lovely dreams, there is still, unfortunately, nightmares that will come to us. So, I wonder why.
Chris, what do you consider to be a nightmare? Does it have to be the intense fear, or just be something upsetting? I mean, how far are you? What are you calling nightmare?
I think he's talking about me. Sorry, man.
So the empirical definition of a nightmare, clinical definition, is a dream you have at night that is so terrifying to you that it wakes you up out of the dream. Oh. If you do not wake up out of it, it's just called a bad dream or a scary dream. So we can work with both.
Mine are always bad, I guess.
I don't have any.
I can.
Oh,
My sister
ahead.
brother was about to speak.
I can say something quick about the brain. So when you're in REM sleep, your motor system is suppressed, and your perceptual systems are hyperactivated. So that's where all the visceral, intense content comes from. And there are some theories that argue that your lack of sensed agency, because your motor system is being suppressed, you don't. It's the dream where you're running down the hall, but you're not getting anywhere. And there's an idea that there's a terror that emerges because you can't control things in the dream. You can't control your body. And there's also some theories that that's where demons come from. And there are stories of demons because it's our loss of agency. It's appropriate the purple man is telling you this.
The Purple Corinthian.
That's right.
Oh, I was going to say, so I work with victims, and this is one of the most common things that people who've been victimized experience are nightmares. And, we think of them as negative, and they are, but for victims who I've interviewed, they've said it kind of became positive because they can switch the narrative in the dream, kind of what you were talking about, Ben, where, the victimization didn't happen or something different happened, or moms who I talked to whose children were murdered, they got to switch it. So it started as a nightmare, but then there was something different that happened. And it was very, I would say, essential in their coping to be able to get through it, where eventually they were able to sleep through the night again. Not that I'm putting a positive spin here on nightmares. I'm just saying that, they can sometimes serve a purpose if somebody's trying to cope with a victimization.
So you're actually talking about what could be, or what is a therapeutic approach called imagery rehearsal therapy. So if anybody suffers from reoccurring nightmares? Any of you been having a hard time coming to my realm? Raise your hand. Yeah, my bad. But also, I have a support for you. If you find someone who knows how to work with these, basically you can just jot down your nightmare from beginning to end as much as you can remember, and then on a separate piece of paper, starting from the same neutral-ish beginning, you write it down all over again. But before it turns to the nightmare realm, you change it, you re-script it. Just like in a therapy session, you plan on how would you go about that interaction differently. What will you do different next time? So you can destroy the earlier original nightmare, tear it up, throw it to pieces, and then rehearse that new dream that you want to have, just like you practice behavioral strategies in a therapy session or an interpersonal dynamic in a psychodynamic therapy session. And if you repeat it enough times, your neurons are reflexively connecting. And eventually that becomes the new dream you have that night.
I just want to quickly talk about the purpose of fear or, scariness. It's there for a reason, and it evolved to protect us. So if something is scaring us, we need to ask ourselves why. What is it trying to protect us from? Sometimes, though, when we are afraid, there's no actual danger, but there's still something we can learn from that fear, and we need to always talk to the fear and find out, okay, what are you trying to tell me so I can be safe in the future?
Another thing is that sometimes these things are shaped culturally. And so some things that may seem very scary to some, like in the US, often ghosts are considered, like visions of ghosts are in horror films. It's scary. And in some cultures, there is a great comfort to having the experience of being visited by someone who has passed. That is definitely a great example of that perception sensation difference and how that can happen even when someone is experiencing, hey, I'm awake or I'm asleep, and yet I am experiencing this sensation. I'm having this, dream, or I'm having this experience. And that can also differ. So even when we're talking about what is a nightmare, that's also something to consider when we're talking about that, and we're talking about different types of healing methodologies and what we consider as a healing experience for someone, and how sometimes people specifically go to someone to channel the experiences of someone else through their experiences of grief. And I think that's important to also mention, and not to say that one is better than or is the right way to heal, etc., but to acknowledge that that is also present for a lot of people.
When the nightmare itself becomes torturous, when we have even a waking nightmare, when we are feeling like we are suffering, in the Sandman series, we see Dream go to hell itself to get what he has lost, to reclaim what was taken. But how else have we seen suffering in the Sandman series, in the comics, in our practices, and is there a way out of it? Is there a purpose for it?
Hell is, in most cultures, hell is a bad place. It's a place where you are punished for bad things. But there are also cultures where hell is a place of just renewal of different types. And I think it goes along with kind of the penal mindset of certain cultures. So when it comes to criminals and criminal justice is, okay, what do you do with people who've done bad things? But if you think about it even more from a parenting mindset, when you punish your children, it's not because you want them to be in pain or you want them to suffer. It's because you want them to learn, okay, this behavior wasn't helpful or wasn't good or wasn't beneficial in some way. And unfortunately, there are times in which punishment can go too far, but I think the purpose of pain is similar. The purpose of hell is, okay, this life that you lived, these choices you made did not work in the society that you lived in. So what changes do need to be made? That's not correct English. Do you need to make it's late. So that way, in the next world that you live in the next society that you will be in, that you can do better. And so I like to think of it as that mindset of like the rehabilitation mindset, the redemption. Like just because you do bad things doesn't mean that you are always bad forever and ever.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off that because discomfort or suffering leads to transformation. You know, you think of something like a moth in a cocoon. You know, the caterpillar goes into the cocoon and dissolves into a goo. Is that hell? Probably for the caterpillar. But if it can survive being a goo, it's going to get wings. And then it's going to keep suffering because it's got to flap those wings against the hide to strengthen them. And if you see it, you can see it in there, struggling. And so it's hard for us. You know there's more to this story.
Kind of feeling
You
that
heard
way
me
right
do
now.
this before. Well, and when you're watching it, you can see the suffering, and you want to save from the suffering. But the suffering is necessary for the transformation. You
Well
let the
said.
moth out too soon, it'll die.
I was going to say, I agree with both of that, except for the Corinthian and his serial killer pals in the show.
He's an exception that proves the rule.
I have an opinion on that. And I understand this conversation is really awesome because Galt was necessary to to make the case that people should try to transcend bad things and redefine who they are. At the same time, by having Galt in the story, Dream can justify murdering Corinthian because Dream created Corinthian to be a nightmare. He didn't create him to be a growth seed. He created him to eat people's eyes and do stuff like that. So when Dream's captured and Corinthian's doing his thing, Dream's only in a position to be able to judge him for not being able to change because Galt did. So that tension in the story I hadn't realized before. And that's just Gaiman saving himself because, no, I'm just teasing.
I'll keep mine short. I think that for hell, it's essentially defined for me as incongruence. It's something that I don't resonate with, not me as in person, but like the I of all of us. And even thinking about Corinthian, right? This is my personal hell because I cannot do the things, be the person that I want to be because of blank. And, or if we think about, I don't want to be trapped in this glass case. I don't want to be on the run with this quote unquote bastard child and not feel safe. These are these personal hells that we trap ourselves in every single day, regardless if it's real or imagined. And I think that that's a really critical piece is that our brains are so powerful that we get to decide what's true. And the hell that we get placed in sometimes is filled with shoulda, woulda, couldas. And I think that incongruence is a really big piece of this show of, I think, not to toot my own horn, but Death is like the only one that's like super cool.
Yes.
But there isn't much incongruence with her character, right? Like with everyone else, there's a fight, there's conflict with who they are, how they are.
She's at peace with who she is.
Personality. But I think that struggle continues to be our own prison that we continue to put ourselves in.
I really like this caterpillar discussion and hell and your comment about incongruence because in some cultures you learn how to live a life of grace in a world of suffering. Mm-hmm. And in traditional Christian cultures you learn that there will be an end and you will be in a place called heaven where you'll still be yourself and there will be no suffering. And these other religions don't promise you that. And I very much resonate to the more Eastern view because life itself is a state of tension, right? Every single cell is struggling to keep energy coming into it and repairing its systems to persist. And hell is a blown up version of that struggle. So I love it. The thing is, in other religions, hell doesn't get displaced somewhere else. Heaven doesn't get displaced somewhere else. It's all here now. And the issue is to live in it with grace. And yeah.
Travis, were you saying something as well?
I agreed with something.
He was defending the Corinthian.
So,
No, I was agreeing that death is at peace with who she is. So effectively, she's the one self-actualized character in the whole story.
as my good sister Death mentions in the comic, for those who have read it, no real spoilers, but she is the end. She is there for the beginning of things to introduce, because at the beginning there is always the concept, the loss that is possible. And at the end of the universe, Death will come and put all the chairs on the tables and lock up afterwards.
You're welcome.
And so that is the end of suffering to some degree. Not to say that if you are suffering, that is the only end. But like Winston Churchill once said, if you're going through hell, keep going. Use that process, use that fire to get you out of there and into the next step. So the next step of our talk is a very quick Q&A for any curious minds who have any thoughts or questions about dreaming. You can raise your hand, you can come to the microphone here. And in the meanwhile, while those who are thinking up questions are thinking up your questions and bracing their courage to come to the microphone while I'm stalling for that, I want to mention a little bit something about what one can do with one's dreams. Beyond just moving forward, there is this concept of lucidity, where if you are aware of yourself while you are dreaming through a variety of state of consciousness checks, like pulling one's own finger and seeing it stretches like rubber, or Monkey D. Luffy if you follow, then you might be able to catch yourself in a dream and maybe even exert some control. You can notice text itself is hard to see, or you may be able to summon a change of scenery. You can be as powerful as you imagine yourself to be. So we have a question from the audience.
All right.
Okay, so my question harkens back to the symbolism in dreams and like the apps. Now, as a art therapist, one of the things that we talk about is that we have the client sort of bring up the symbolism in the pieces, and yet we also have assessments that we use for them. And the example that we have is there's an assessment called Draw a Person in the Rain. And this was created by a Western art therapist who believed that when you drew the person in the rain, it was supposed to represent like struggle. And so if you drew rain boots or an umbrella, you were a well-resourced person. If you didn't do those things, then you weren't. But as mentioned before, culture affects you. So in places where there's drought, the rain is welcomed and we want to feel it. So I'm curious if there's symbolism that you've had in your dreams that maybe don't match your the assumption of the collective, should I say?
I don't have that. So I had a dream recently that I was giving a talk about my grandmother and explaining her life story. But the story was like, there was some changes to the story that like were very weird and like from Harry Potter. And I was like, what does this mean? Does this mean that I was distracted by my own grandmother's story or whatever? And so like at first I was kind of concerned that I couldn't even tell my grandmother's story in a dream, but then I thought, well, it means that my grandmother is inspiring my love for storytelling because she always told stories. So that's why I had to kind of say that, because at first it'd be like, wait, what?
Well, we're asking about a dream that somebody might find as a nightmare that might be pleasant. There are other options too, like something that could be a nightmare. Well, okay, if zombies show up in my dreams, I know it's a dream because I have a lot of lucid dreams. We were talking about that yesterday. I have a lot. I used to have more, but if zombies show up, I know it's a dream. I try to get them to go away. One of my favorite dream examples of this, and I just looked at this, was in November. Sometimes I talk about my dreams on Facebook. It's one where there are zombies, and I just said to them, "You're not real. Go away." And then they mutter, "Oh, sorry," and mutter, and, it's like, and wander off. It's related to that. Brittani, when you started doing the Dream app, have you found yourself having more lucid dreams than you used to? since you're thinking about dreams a lot? Because for years I kept a dream journal, and honestly, the reason I stopped keeping the dream journal because I was getting tired of my lucid dreams. And having conversations that didn't matter. It's like, who cares what you say? You're not real.
I dream every day.
Oh, yeah, but do you have more lucid dreams? Are you dreams where you know it's a dream?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, to allow for the other questions, by all means, ask away.
Sorry if this is not the most well-formed question, but speaking of nightmares, I was kind of curious about what happens when you have a nightmare that it's not something that happened to you. For example, you watch a horror movie. Like for me, I don't normally get super scared by horror movies, but I'm like, that might show up in my dreams tonight. And a lot of you mentioned having like really tough jobs where you're hearing really like traumatic stories. Like how do you prevent that from showing up in your dreams?
One thing you're talking about, which is really relevant, is vicarious trauma, learning about something terrifying through either media, through one's work, and this can actually cause capital T trauma if you're exposed to too many of these things. So keep an eye for that, see how you're affected by things. There has been some interesting research shown that what you do before bed can incubate a particular dream. If you're focusing on certain things, if you're meditating on certain things before you go to sleep, that is more likely to come up. The day residue that Freud called it technically still happens. So if you are watching something terrifying before bed, maybe engage in something more pleasant right before you go to sleep. But how do you all think?
Yeah, I kind of do that because I work with a lot of, like I said, offenders, and so a lot of negative things, very not nice things, and so I really don't want to think about that when I go home. So the first thing I do when I go home is I start reading like fan fiction, something like silly and goofy, and it just kind of gets me in a different mindset. And so that way when I'm going to bed, I'm less likely to have images or thoughts of what I did at work.
If we think of dreams as an opportunity to process things that are happening in our waking lives, then it could be very useful, right, to either set aside time in our waking lives to process this and or to do so, in the dreaming state. But along with that, a lot of times people, when they think of psychology, they think of like mental illness, or they think of trauma and they're thinking, post-traumatic stress. Oh, now we're talking about vicarious trauma. I actually did my dissertation on a construct of post-traumatic growth and vicarious post-traumatic growth. Can we hear these stories, and can that encourage our own personal growth in a variety of different ways? And so that, I think, also has its place. And so, when we're talking about some of these different components, a lot of therapists have their own therapists, actually. A lot of us have support systems. A lot of us do actually consult with others. And, part of that connectedness, part of our own rituals of sitting with things and processing things are actually part of our growth as well. And I think that's also important to note.
Fantastic. Let's go with our last question and some quick last answers before maybe a photo shoot.
Let's see, I want to preface that I'm an aerospace engineer. I work on large systems. So I've always thought, and whatever I've read about dreaming, it has to do with consolidation of short-term memory into long-term memory, and that it has a lot to do with how you create that relational situation, which is more than 10 layers deep, which we can't do ourselves in computer science. But I think that I liked when you talked about changing in your dreams, because you could be perhaps shifting the way that you create that relational database that really controls who you are. But one thing that's always kind of worried me is I pretty much have always fearful and nightmares. I mean, there were times like, I'd say until my late 30s, I didn't remember any of my dreams because I think they were so traumatic. And I'm wondering what you would think about that. Somebody that continually just has fearful dreams and almost doesn't want to remember them, and there's no kind of transformational moments in them.
Just speaking as a therapist, right? The two styles of therapy that I use the most are narrative therapy and something called internal family systems therapy. And what you're describing makes me think, so internal family systems is all about how there's a multiplicity of our minds. We are not a unitary mind, right? There's a part of you that feels this way. There's a part of you that feels that way. There are parts of you that are young. There are parts of you that are holding trauma. And hearing this story, what comes up for me, and I don't know your story other than what you just told me, but it sounds to me like there might be a part that's trying to say something, and it doesn't get a chance to say it in the waking world. And so it pops up and says it in the dreaming world.
Actually, the kind of therapy that I do is where you create characters out of your internal conflicts, and I've got a huge array of them, and they are very defined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
And then when you take those creations and you put them in a situation where you're talking to someone else about them, and then maybe you're talking to a larger group about them, you're suddenly changing what your memories are going to be. And, I like to say live to remember. And that means what you're living is going to be what you live in, right? And what you've lived is what you're going to live in. And we have the ability to consciously steer what we're going to end up remembering.
Yeah, this is the piggyback off of that. I also don't want to over pathologize this idea that things are always bad. We do have we have a keen sense of identifying the bad dreams over the good ones. I, like you, I have the same bad dream of probably getting shot 4 times a week. And so I think that it's much easier for me to have this bias towards remembering that one versus because it's more excitatory, because it's more visceral, because it hits harder, or maybe it's the last one. But when we're in this REM sleep, we do have multiple, and if you I have started watching my REM or my app just to see how long I'm in REM, to notice or to start distinguishing, am I only having this one singular dream, or am I having others that I forget about, or I have less detail of because I have this attention bias towards the bad, because we innately do as humans.
I just want to close out on, not to assume anything, but a lot of people think that because they have nightmares, something is wrong. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong. And it's okay and valid to just have a lot of nightmares. Maybe that's just your existence for now, and it might change. But I want to kind of close it that we shouldn't shame ourselves for this experience. Because maybe this is something that it allows you a perspective that other people don't have. Because you have this experience with a lot of nightmares, it gives you a different look into the world and into other people that other people might not have. Maybe that's your superpower.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And for everyone here, if you're noticing that your experience as a dreamer, as in the waking world, in and out of your work or even your own therapy sessions is not yet where you want it to be, it doesn't have to stay there. You can always make a change. That's the story of Galt. That's eventually the story of Dream. And even Lucifer themselves, as the end of the last season shows us, something new can happen. So if you are in need, seek out help. If the help you're getting has helped you enough to the point where it's time to find the next stage of help, keep on shopping around, keep on taking care of yourselves, keep on getting your sleep consistently, and have sweet dreams. Thank you very much, everyone.